18 years after the suspicious death of Black aerospace engineer Dr. Elijah Carter, his daughter, Riley Carter, steps into Ether Dynamics with nothing more than a hazmat suit and a mediocre resume. When the Skyhawk X prototype suddenly stopped working in the middle of an investor demo, arrogant CEO Graham Maddox looked at the girl covered in grease and smiled faintly. "You think you can fix it? Prove it," in front of them. He thought it was a public humiliation. But little did he know, he had just invited the greatest threat inside his company's doors. Before we get into the story, I want to know where you are following from today. And if you love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part of this tumultuous journey. The central conference room at Ether Dynamics is cold as steel, a space designed like a laboratory for the modern age. Glass, metal, and blue-white light shine down from the ceiling onto a long conference table where the company's most powerful people sit in silence, so quiet that the stopwatches of executive assistants in the corner can be heard. A series of aircraft blueprints hang like trophies, with the Skyhawk X1 taking center stage, an unfinished highlight. In the middle of the room, Ellie Lane stood tall, not cowering or hiding anything. She did not belong to this world of gray suits and expensive perfumes. Ellie was an engineer, raised in the metal warehouse where her father, Marcus Lane, the legendary chief engineer, had died in a testing accident that was never explained. She wore a dark blue engineering jacket with frayed cuffs and a light gray shirt underneath. Not fancy, but clean, neat down to the crease. Her hair was tied back, simple, and she wore no makeup. But her eyes were sharp and calm. The eyes that had learned to read blueprints before they learned to read letters. Ellie has a slim figure, but as she walks up to the screen and begins her presentation, even, decisive voice. The Skyhawk X1 is designed not just to fly fast, but not to crash. 3 independent radar return layers protect the entire flight path. This principle is not new. It is the foundation my father built when he was alive. We don't need a dangerous jump. We need a safe step. A few nodded. But Grant Maddox, the new CEO after the restructuring, didn't budge. He was wearing a perfectly tailored gray suit, sitting back in his chair, legs crossed, his eyes cold as ice. Grant turned on the remote control, changing the slide. Skyhawk X2 model appeared, a new design, looking minimalistic, sleek, and definitely cheaper. The 3-layer radar system was gone. In its place was a single integrated navigation module, lighter, faster, and 42% cheaper. Grant said, without a trace of emotion, "The market doesn't need ethics. It needs speed and cost. The Skyhawk X2 allows us to increase our profit per unit by 8%, and that's the number I chose." Ellie squeezed the pen in her hand, not angry, not panicked. She just stared straight at the X2 model, like it was a betrayal. Her voice was small but clear, each word cutting through the air like a knife. "You're not just removing me from the project. You're removing life from that blueprint." The room fell silent. Grant stood up and walked slowly toward Ellie, his leather shoes clicking on the polished concrete floor. He stopped right in front of her, bowing his head as if handing down a death sentence. "We're on a new plan. Ellie, you're no longer on the team." Several of the senior executives glanced at each other, but no one said anything. They all knew Grant had no mercy for those who opposed his direction, even Marcus Lane's daughter. Ellie didn't reply. She just stood up, folded the papers, and left. No turning back, no explanation. But as the glass doors closed behind her, Ellie knew she wouldn't turn her back on the one thing she couldn't afford to tarnish, her father's legacy. And to protect that, she needs to go back to where it all began. Not the central boardroom, not the data warehouse, not anywhere else mapped on the current power map. But it was a small room on the old technical floor. No one had set foot in it for many years. There, her father worked late into the night, creating each prototype not on a budget, but with integrity, and the sweat of an uncompromising engineer. The heavy iron door creaked open. No one knew Ellie was there, and probably no one cared. The wind from the hallway whistled softly through the narrow crack in the door. No one came to this place anymore. A hidden room at the end of the technical floor, where the fluorescent lights were faded and the walls still had oil stains from years ago. Ellie pushed the door open. The hinges creaked, like a sigh from the past. This was her father's space, Marcus Lane. No nameplate, no badge, just a small storage room. But in Ellie's eyes, this was the true heart of ether dynamics. Not the sleek conference rooms or the test bed, but here, where the first prototypes were born from dedication and integrity. She stepped inside, her heels clicking softly on the rough concrete floor. A thick layer of dust covered the metal shelves, and a few rolled-up blueprints lay untouched in cardboard tubes. In the corner of the room, an old model lay covered with a tarp. Ellie pulled back the silver cloth. The original Skyhawk emerged, not the polished version from the presentation slides, but a handmade model. The silver paint peeling, the edges smeared with the fingerprints of its maker. She sat down, took an old towel and gently wiped each detail. Her eyes softened. There was no one to present to. No CEO, no pressure, just her and her father, and the immutable principles he left behind. Just below the model, she found a small, worn, leather-bound technical manual. It was her father's. She recognized the handwriting at first glance. The notes were dense, the flight diagrams, the safety rules, the load calculations, all neat and clear. By the last page, the writing was weaker but still steady. No profit is worth a life. Ellie froze. From the hallway, someone's voice echoed, "She's still sitting in Marcus Lane's room? She must think she's special, just because she's his daughter." Ellie didn't turn. She reached out and lightly touched the silver wing of the model, her fingertips brushing over the peeling paint as if touching a memory. No tears, no reaction, just a whisper, loud enough for her to hear. "I will complete what you left unfinished." As soon as she closed the door to the old engineering room, a cold wind blew through the empty hallway. The December wind whistled through the cracks in the hallway windows. The phone in her pocket vibrated. Ellie opened it, a brief system message, colder than the snowstorm outside. Urgent announcement. Skyhawk X2 had a problem during a test flight. Contact has been lost in the north. High probability of crash. Ellie's heart skipped a beat. She didn't remember how she'd left Ether Dynamics headquarters, only that the wind had started to whip ice across the windows as the door to her small apartment closed behind her. That night, the news had filled every intercom. The Skyhawk X2 had disappeared from radar after 3 minutes of flying in heavy snow. All eyes were on the radar. A system Grant had decided to change to cut costs. Not a single line mentioned the design flaws. Not a single second mentioned Ellie Lane. But she wasn't gloating. In her apartment, which had only a wooden desk and a projector screen, Ellie turned on her computer and took out her dark leather diary. On the plain paper, she wrote a single line: "Data does not retaliate, it only repeats what is hidden." 3 days later. Inside the basement engineering simulation room, a satellite weather map is displayed on the screen. A simulation of the conditions at the time of the crash. Ellie taps commands into the console. At her side are Noah Briggs, a seasoned mechanical engineer who keeps himself out of power struggles, and Ava Monroe, a navigation expert who had raised concerns about the new radar module's instability but was ignored. They didn't look at Ellie with pity. They didn't ask why she was returning to the blueprint that had been thrown out of the conference. They just stood there silently beside her, as if all three of them knew this wasn't just one person's job. "We need to recreate the weather conditions, humidity, snow, ionospheric interference," Ava said, flicking through the data. "And go back to the original blueprints," Noah added quietly. "Find out what they deleted." Ellie nodded, her eyes unblinking at the error messages coming from the cheap radar module. A red circle appeared. Data jumped. The Skyhawk X2 began to shake on the simulation screen, exactly as the rescued co-pilot had described. The radar went completely silent in the wet snow. Ellie said nothing. She just pulled open a drawer and pulled out the original Skyhawk X1 blueprints, the ones that had been dismissed from the conference room like an obsolete piece of paper. Right in the bottom corner, next to the old radar diagram, the familiar handwriting appeared, faint but still clear. Dual radar mode, layered moisture resistance, required in conditions below -15 degrees C. Marcus Lane. Ellie squeezed the paper gently, her voice low but as sure as the final weld of a prototype. "They didn't just cut a technical detail, they erased my father's final warning." 1 week after the accident, news of the Skyhawk X2 crash has yet to reach the media, held back by invisible hands at the highest levels. But inside Ether Dynamics, the undercurrents have already begun to churn. Ellie barely slept for 3 days. Every night she, Ava, and Noah struggled between simulations, notes, and internal email chains. The patchwork of evidence began to pile up. The radar failed in wet conditions, the anti-jamming mode was removed from the commercial version, and most importantly, Grant knew it. On the 4th night, Ava placed her hands on the completed 3D model, her voice hoarse but firm. "We can't wait, they're launching a new product tomorrow morning." Ellie said nothing. She nodded, then looked down at her hand, where the ink was still there from the first design she and her father had ever drawn together. Profit can be covered up, but life only wants to keep. The next morning at the Ether Dynamics Hall. Radar is completely silent in wet snow. Ellie's words echoed in her mind as she stood backstage, alone behind the thick velvet curtains of the Ether Dynamics headquarters auditorium. On stage, Grant Wallace spoke in his usual voice, confident, smooth, and flawless. The Skyhawk X2 is the next frontier in intelligent flight. A quantum leap for commercial aviation, where efficiency and speed are put on par with safety. The applause was routine and pre-programmed. The front row was filled with investors, expensive ties, tired eyes, and smiles that looked like they had been signed off on a deal. But Ellie saw something else. She saw the untouched looks, the skepticism lurking in the eyes of some of the veteran directors. Just as Grant paused mid-sentence to emphasize the word breakthrough, Ellie stepped onto the stage. She didn't wait for an introduction. She didn't wait for a flash of light. She just spoke, clearly and without shaking. "I'll give you 3 minutes. Let me show you something that's not in any of the presentations." The whole room froze. Grant turned, his smile frozen like aircraft paint, pretty but brittle. "Miss Ellie Lane." "Just 3 minutes," she interrupted. "I don't represent tradition nor any faction here. I represent data and the people who flew into a whiteout radar field." The whole hall was silent. Ava Monroe from below pressed the button that projected the 3D model onto the main screen. The map appeared, the Skyhawk X2 flight path, mostly green, but when it reached the deep snow area, everything turned to white. No data, no signal, a deadly blind spot. "This is the radar the X2 is using," Ava said, her voice calm as if she had repeated the warning a dozen times without anyone listening. "The anti-humidity mode has been disabled," Noah added, from the engineering console. He opened an internal email, zooming in on the note. "No need for dual radar. The cost is not strategic." G. Wallace. The room gasped. Grant stepped forward, about to say something, but an old hand was raised. Mr. Marshall Wynn, senior consulting director who has been with Ether since the early days, sat silently in the front row, silver hair, metal-rimmed glasses, and his voice was not loud, but enough to silence the whole hall. "We have ignored human life because of numbers." A second later, a wave of whispers erupted. Investors began talking privately. The camera panned to Ellie. Grant, standing still, was at a loss for how to hide his face for the first time in years. Ellie still didn't look at him. She just stared at the slow-motion 3D model on the screen, where the white streak continued to appear, empty, cold. "I'm not accusing anyone," she said softly. "I'm just bringing up something that shouldn't be hidden." Just hours after the groundbreaking presentation at the conference hall, the top floor of Ether Dynamics headquarters was quietly tense. No sirens, no arguing. Just determined footsteps and silent glances among the senior advisors, as if everyone knew something was about to change, but no one wanted to be the first to say it. Ellie sat across from Margot Ellison. The board had appointed her to replace Evelyn as executive chairman just 3 days earlier. The woman was unlike anyone Ellie had known at Ether. No flash, no verbal pressure. But her every raised eyebrow, every slow nod sent a chill through the room. Grant was there too, quiet. No more confident stride, no more passing glances at others like they were mere ornaments. He sat hunched forward, hands clasped together, and glanced at Ellie every now and then, not with anger, but with something else. The realization that he had lost. Margot put the thick file down on the table. Her voice was not high but clear. "I asked for the entire archive to be opened. Technical files, drawings, emails, internal reports, everything related to the Skyhawk X2. No middlemen. No redactions." No one answered, but something had changed. Like air compressed behind the glass, threatening to spill out. Ellie didn't speak right away. She just opened the old leather bag she'd carried with her since her first day in the ether. Inside was a drawing, yellowed with age, the corners a little curled, but still clear. She set it down on the glass table, turning to face Margot. This is the original design of the Skyhawk X2, the never-before-seen version, developed under the guidance of Chief Engineer Marcus Lane, my father. Margot bent down, scanning the details with her systems engineer eyes before taking her seat in the most powerful chair. When she reached the radar area, Ellie gently pointed. This place, secondary radar, designed to activate in wet weather and deep snow, but it was crossed out. She turned the design around, revealing handwriting near the edge of the page, faded, but still legible enough. This was never meant to be compromised. Marcus Lane. No one said anything for 3 seconds. Then Margot looked at Grant. Her gaze wasn't harsh, but it was cold. A coldness like the upper atmosphere where a jet engine starts to freeze. You traded the wrong thing. Grant opened his mouth to speak, then his lips pursed, then relaxed. There was nothing left to say. No excuse could cover a blueprint whose signature and ethics were intact. Margot turned back to Ellie. Her voice was low, not an order, but a charge. Ellie, are you ready to continue the project? The young girl looked down at her father's blueprints, then around the room, where she had once been just a small engineer, where for years people had called her Marcus Lane's child like a shadow. This time, she did not bow her head. She nodded slightly. Not to fulfill my father's dream, but to make sure no one else pays the price for what was left out. Margot nodded, leaning back in her chair. And the room was quiet again, but the quiet of something beginning, not ending. Ellie didn't return to the lab that day, nor did she linger in the executive offices, where the engineering teams were quietly working through the night, trying to sort through the debris left by Grant Wallace. Instead, she turned off the beaten path, through the small woods behind the headquarters, where the paved path led to the aviation memorial, a circular, granite courtyard where no one spoke but everything was remembered. On a stone pedestal in the middle of the square, the bronze statue of Marcus Lane stands tall, his eyes turned to the horizon, as if still observing the sky he lived and died for. At his feet, words are carved into the stone, now visible under the white snow. Marcus Lane, engineered for integrity. Ellie paused. She said nothing for a long moment, just stood there, looking at her father's face, no longer the legendary chief engineer of Ether, but the man who had once taken the curly-haired girl to the model room to show her what a center of gravity was, what lift was, why a plane took off. The snow was falling lightly, not too cold, but enough to coat her shoulders in a pale white. Ellie moved closer, placing her hand on the stone that bore her father's name, her hand trembling slightly, not from the wind, but from the things that remained unsaid. Her voice was soft but not broken. I did not come for revenge. She took a deep breath as if holding it for the long journey ahead. I came to prove that right still has a place in the sky. No one heard her. There was no applause, no board, no blueprint. Just her, the statue, and the silent sky above, where her father had believed that technology should serve life, not be at the expense of it. And in that brief moment, as a breeze blew across the square, Ellie thought she heard her father's voice. Not a word, but a quiet confirmation. As if he were saying, "You made the right choice." The next day, the atmosphere in the office changed dramatically. The door to the conference room opened, and Grant Maddox walked in, his face heavy and silent, like someone who had just received an inevitable verdict. His eyes were no longer the usual confidence, but disappointment mixed with bitterness. A man whose own legacy had been turned against him. Grant Maddox, as of today, is no longer the project leader for Skyhawk X. The voice of Margot Ellison, the new executive chairman, rang out coldly and decisively. This decision is to protect the reputation and core values of Ether Dynamics. Grant nodded, said nothing, then turned and walked out of the room, each step echoing in the conference room like the end of a closed chapter. At that moment, the lights turned brighter, shining directly on Ellie Lane, who stood up to take the project manager chair that she had long dreamed of but never thought would come this way. "Ellie, you will be the one to take Skyhawk X into the next chapter," Margot said, her eyes both challenging and hopeful. This is not just a commercial aircraft project, but a symbol of safety and ethics in aviation engineering. Ellie felt the pressure, but she was also filled with determination. She began to restructure the engineering team, bringing in top experts and setting new, more stringent standards than ever before. A revolution in design, manufacturing, and testing. Drawings were checked down to the smallest detail, and meetings were held to discuss and consolidate ideas, aiming to raise the Skyhawk X's technical standards to international levels, not only meeting but surpassing the most stringent regulations. The company atmosphere became more vibrant and hopeful, like new sails filled with wind, ready to head towards the vast sky, but this time with a clearer vision, with a more steadfast heart. Finally, on the fuselage of the new generation Skyhawk X aircraft, the new words are printed boldly, sparkling under the factory lights. In honor of Marcus Lane, engineered to protect. A commitment not just to the deceased, but to the future, where safety is never sacrificed for profit. The official launch day of the new generation Skyhawk X at the Ether Dynamics Grand Hall, the official launch day of the new generation Skyhawk X. The stage lights were bright, the big screen showed spectacular flight images of the new generation aircraft. Ellie Lane did not take the stage that day. Instead, she stood quietly in the wings, where the soft lighting did not overshadow her steady presence. The team of young engineers she had personally led and inspired stepped forward, confidently and proudly presenting the fruits of their innovation journey. Every word they spoke, every image they projected on screen was a testament to the perseverance, intelligence, and indomitable spirit of the team, led by Ellie, a woman who dared to stand up for truth, safety, and justice in the aviation industry. Outside, a prominent tech newspaper quickly published a headline that echoed throughout the community. The engineer who rewrote history, not with anger, but with persistence. Ellie is talked about not only as a technical leader, but also as a symbol of perseverance and faith in values that last beyond profits. In that moment, amidst the chilly winter breeze, Ellie closed her eyes. Her mind seemed to open up a corridor of memories, where the figure of her father, Marcus Lane, appeared clearly. He stood there, his eyes full of pride, nodding slightly as if sending encouragement from the past. Ellie didn't cry. She just smiled. A smile of peace, of knowing she wasn't winning, but simply setting things right, what should have been right from the start. "I didn't win," she whispered. "I just gave the sky back its integrity." Justice does not always come with loud applause. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the form of strong people who do not sell their morals for temporary glory. And sometimes, to protect a heritage, we don't need to win against anyone. We need only hold fast to the path that our predecessors have chosen, the path of integrity, of truth, and of an undying belief in what is right.